Now, if the 2020 F1 season wasn't going to go down as one of the strangest in history, I think it definitely is going to be after that Tuscan Grand Prix. 2 red flag sessions, which we've not seen since Brazil 2016, and only 12 cars finished the race. It was almost the same level of attrition that we saw in Austria in the season opener. But just because 12 drivers finished the race does not mean that they are safe from the Autosport driver ratings. So let's see how those drivers stacked up. Now, I'm going to start off with a bit of a disclaimer. There are 4 drivers on here that are going to start off with a base level of 4 out of 10 because of their involvement in the safety car restart. Madness. But the first driver that I'm going to talk about today was out before that had even begun, and that is Pierre Gasly at AlphaTauri. What a difference a week makes. Pierre Gasly, on top of the world after his win in Monza, came into what can only be described as a pretty awful weekend in Mugello. Gasly's getting a 5 out of 10 from us from this weekend, mainly because of his Q1 exit, which he cursed down to a setup problem. But Franz Tost was pretty critical of his display and basically just said he didn't have the speed to get out of Q1 this weekend, rather than there being a problem with the car. Now, he isn't scored any lower because of Raikkonen's tiny slide that kind of set off the whole Grosjean, Raikkonen, Gasly crash. But maybe he could have backed out a little sooner and he would have had his race saved. But at the end of the day, not a great day for Gasly. Daniel Kvyat, on the other hand, had a pretty solid race, and he only misses out on a 9 out of 10 for this week's ratings, primarily because he didn't make it into Q3, even though he was the faster of the AlphaTauris running this weekend. He drove well in the race from 12th and had a really good opening lap and managed to keep his nose clean through a lot of the incidents that we saw throughout the race. And even though he was maybe under the microscope a little bit more than the other drivers for the safety car restart, he had a pretty good race overall, so he's getting a strong score from us this week. Moving on to sister team Red Bull, and although very different outcomes for the race, these 2 drivers are getting the exact same score from us this weekend. Max Verstappen and Alex Albon are getting 8s out of 10. Now, Max is getting his high score predominantly because of his brilliant performance in qualifying. It's the closest that we've seen that Red Bull get to Mercedes, and for that he deserves a bit of applause. But he was clearly in trouble from the start, with the team having to fix a rear light problem on the grid. Now, whether that had anything to do with what then played out at the start, of which he had a brilliant start and looked actually that he was going to fly easily into P2, just meant that he ran out of power, no acceleration, winded up way back, which ultimately led to his early exit because he got involved in a lot of the midfield scrappage. Alex Albon finally got his podium that he's been longing for, that he's been needing to quieten down the critics. Not sure if it's going to be enough to stop everybody criticising his performances so far this season, but ultimately really hard fought for P3 from Alex, and ultimately he got that Red Bull to where it should be in both race and qualifying, so it's an 8 out of 10 for him. The reason he's being docked marks is because he lost a lot of positions on every restart, which in a Red Bull you just can't really afford if you're going to be battling at the front. But his pass on Ricciardo was rather ballsy, so he does earn some marks for that. Moving on to our driver of the day, Daniel Ricciardo, some say was more deserving of that P3 position, and to be honest, he was running in P3 for a lot of the race and looked really competitive. He misses out on a top score from us this week, predominantly because he couldn't repeat his Q2 time in his first Q3 run, and had he done so, he was looking like he was going to be qualifying 5th. But he drove brilliantly in the race, briefly running second for a little bit, although ultimately he got caught by Alex Albon's Red Bull, but still, solid performance from Daniel Ricciardo in that Renault. Now, Ocon's score is down primarily because of his Q3 issue, which meant that not only did he not set a time, he also stopped a lot of other drivers making their final Q3 runs, crucially his teammates, and for that, you're going to lose points. Ultimately had to retire because his brakes were on fire, literally, as George Russell pointed out, and it was a problem that couldn't be fixed under red flag conditions, so unfortunately had to retire. Bit of a sad one for Esteban Ocon this weekend. Heading over to Racing Point now, and another pair of drivers that are going to get the same scores from us this week as a 6 out of 10. Now, starting with Perez. Perez was saved predominantly because of Ocon's off in Q3, which meant that he got to save a little bit of face in where he qualified, but he was still out-qualified by Charles Leclerc's slower Ferrari, and for that he loses points. He was also overtaken by Ricciardo in the race in what some might say is a slower Renault car. Now, he felt a balance problem hindered him during the race, but he did manage to stay clear of the chaos and come home with points, 6 out of 10. Now, several things combine that mean that Lance Stroll can't score higher than a 6, and they are: first off, qualified behind his teammate, and as you all know by now in driver ratings, if you're qualified behind your teammate, you're in for losing a point. Second, not only did he qualify behind his teammate, but he also qualified behind the slower car of Charles Leclerc. After that, he also got overhauled by Ricciardo and was running really strongly. It looked like it was a dead set P3 for him, or could have been a P3 that he could have converted had he brought it home. But it wasn't to be. He was utterly blameless in that crash. We still don't know exactly what happened to Lance Stroll's car to cause the puncture or whatever it was that made him have a pretty spectacular off and left that racing point looking like, I don't even know, like a bomb had hit it or something. But that wasn't his fault, so he's not losing points for that. 6 out of 10 for Lance Stroll. Heading to McLaren now, and the first of the drivers that we've given a base score of 4 out of 10 because of their involvement in the safety car restart chaos. And of course I'm talking about Carlos Sainz, who we've added on a point because he did make it through to Q3. But he must also take the blame for his lap 1 spin as he slid into Stroll and collected Vettel, and it was quite a messy move from him. Now, it might have been a 7 out of 10 for Lando Norris, but he loses a mark for not only qualifying behind his teammate, but falling out of Q2, which he's not done since the 2019 Italian Grand Prix. He didn't think he could do anything more in the race, going from 11th to 6th, and he did well to stay out of trouble, whilst not having the pace and basically picking up from other people's mistakes. Alfa Romeo. Antonio Giovinazzi is another driver that's getting that blanket 4 out of 10 base score because of his involvement in the safety car restart, but he's not gaining any more points because there weren't really any redeeming factors in the race or qualifying that could have saved him. He was knocked out in Q1 and 4 spots away from his teammate, and I guess he did at least make up 1 place on the opening lap before he got involved in that turn 2 Leclerc crash. But other than that, not a great weekend for Antonio. Now, Kimi Raikkonen loses a mark because he crossed into the pit lane way too late after Stroll's off. Now, it turns out that he alone decided to dive into the pit lane, which caused his team a bit of a kerfuffle because the tyres weren't ready. They did not ask him to come in. He also gets marked down because it was ultimately his slight slide, and even though it was minimal, it was his slide that basically led to the turn 2 Leclerc crash at the beginning. It's becoming a bit of a common theme over at Ferrari that Charles Leclerc seems to be able to be standout, pulling performances out of nowhere, where Sebastian Vettel is kind of running around lowly, maybe just in the points. But Leclerc is predominantly getting his high score based on his qualifying lap. Now, he was another beneficiary of Ocon's off, but he still did the time that would secure him P5. But he still nailed his chance from P5 and actually managed to work his way up to P3 in the lap 1 melee. He drove well to hold off Stroll before his tyres dropped off and his lack of power was exposed. He also benefited from not having to stop before the second red flag and for Raikkonen's penalty, which boosted him up the order. Now, Vettel scores low not only because of his lowly qualifying effort in compared to his teammate, but also because Russell seemingly held him off for 34 laps in between the 2 red flag stints. He did get ahead of the Williams off the line at the final start, but earned a point that even he admitted maybe he didn't deserve. Heading over to Williams now, and George Russell gets a 6 out of 10. Now, he can't score higher than this because he really didn't nail things when they counted on both Saturday and Sunday. His team reckoned that his late Q1 off not only damaged his chances for Q2, but also damaged his rear suspension. And he was really lucky at that final restart with the 2 drivers behind him with arguably hotter tyres because they got to do an additional lap up to the grid. His wheels spin off the line, dropping him back 2 places, really undid all of his hard work, and he had to drive like hell after that. Nicholas Latifi is obviously another driver who's getting a base score of 4 out of 10, but he is gaining 1 point to 5 out of 10. He really did look the stronger Williams this weekend in qualifying, which hasn't always been the case. We've been talking about George Russell as being Mr. Saturday, but he failed to improve on his last Q1 run due to a balance setup that meant that he had a lot of understeer. He made a solid initial start to gain 1 place though, and made up even more after the Lecco turn 2 incident. Now, Romain Grosjean almost gained a mark back from us because he managed to get out of Q1 for the 3rd time this season, but his race was tough. Now, we feel like it's only fair to judge him to have as much responsibility over that Lecco turn 2 crash as Gasly, but somehow he managed to continue running, even though at one point he was ready to retire the car before the red flags came out. He reckoned the damage that he sustained from that incident cost him around 2 seconds a lap. So it was a really hard race for Grosjean this weekend. Now Magnussen, like Giovinazzi, isn't gaining any more points on his base score of a 4 out of 10 for the safety car restart, and that's predominantly because he qualified last. And he's also the driver with the most DNFs this season, which is not a good stat to have. Now I was going to go on to talk about Bottas and his bad luck, but it turns out I had some bad luck of my own. The venue that I was filming, basically all 9 teams before now, kicked me out and I had to stop before I got to Mercedes. So here I am in some random beautiful Italian countryside. So there you go, that's one you weren't expecting. But let me get on to Mercedes. And as I mentioned, Bottas's bad luck. I don't know what else Bottas could have thrown at the Tuscan Grand Prix. He gave it absolutely everything, and it just seemed like everything just did not want to go his way this weekend. He had the pace for pole this weekend, 100%. He was looking fast, and there were only ever a few tenths in it between himself and Hamilton. But Ocon having his off meant that he did not get a clean second run in Q3, which made all the difference in the end. And whilst a lot of people are going to say, well, he should have got his first run nailed, he should have set the time then, why was he faffing around with his final run? Yes, okay, that's a valid point, and usually, you guys know, I'm the first one to jump in and criticise Bottas, but I did feel, it just felt like this wasn't his weekend. Everything went wrong from the start. I mean, he got a brilliant start off the line. Hamilton bogged down, Bottas flew into P1 decisively, and it looked like from there he was just going to control the race. But then we had all the incidents, and then we had the restart, which was basically a carbon copy of what we saw, apart from obviously Lewis making a mistake at the start. But we know that getting the toe down into turn 1 was going to be so important, and there it was, advantage Hamilton. And the marked difference that I'm going to say I saw from Bottas this weekend was that he genuinely did try every trick in the book in order to try and beat Hamilton in a way that his team was going to allow him to. Asking for the opposite strategy from Hamilton, again, a good move. Whether it would have worked out in the end, we don't know, because what ended up turning out was that he got through his mediums quicker than Hamilton did because he was pushing, so he had to pit first, which then gave Lewis the choice of tyres when he came in second, and he chose to go on the same set as Bottas did and switch to the hards. And then he was praying for a safety car to come so that it would close the gap up to Hamilton and he could have another shot at him at the restart and again be in that prime position of P2 to get the toe into turn 1, and he was granted it. But even then, when it looked like Hamilton maybe wasn't going to be able to make a stop under the safety car, Bottas flew straight into the pits, and we were like, wow, Bottas is going to be on a fresh set of tyres and Lewis is going to be out there on some old sets. But again, that wasn't to be, because the safety car collected Bottas, which meant that Lewis could trundle around, stop him for a pit stop and come right out into P1, and then we ended up getting a red flag scenario anyway, so it kind of muted that point as well. So everything that could have gone Bottas's way just seemingly didn't. Whilst we're giving him a 7 out of 10, I can't help but feel bad for the guy. Now Lewis, on the other hand, he's getting a higher mark, obviously for the win, but he's not getting as high a mark as he has done in previous Grand Prix, because whilst it was quite clearly a very challenging race for everyone, but also for Lewis, he had to maintain that lead a number of times, not just the one. It wasn't without his mistakes. That start, we have to say, is a major error by Lewis, and it could have cost him the win. It just so happened that everything also seemed to play into his hands, and he was able to make up for that mistake. And I guess we do have to give him marks, and we have given him marks for the pass around Bottas on that second restart. We do have to give him points for that move around Bottas around the outside at the first restart. And we do have to give him points for that move around Bottas after the first red flag restart. It was a good move, but yeah, it wasn't a perfect performance from Lewis by any means, but he still got the job done. He came home with all the points, and to stick a knife further into Bottas's side, even when Bottas was trying to go for fastest lap at the end to gain that 1 point, Lewis was like, nah, got this in the bag. So he came home with all the goodies. What are we going to do? So that's all the drivers rated for the Tuscan Grand Prix. What do you think? Do you agree with our ratings? Did you disagree with our ratings? Let us know in the comments below, and head on over to Autosport.com where you can re-rate the drivers yourself and see how the fan averages stacks up against the Autosport ratings. We're taking a break next week because, of course, there is no Formula 1, but there is the Le Mans 24 Hours, so make sure you do enjoy that and check out our coverage over on Autosport.com. We'll be back for another driver ratings after the Russian Grand Prix, but until then, make sure you subscribe because we'll be doing these ratings after every Grand Prix. And with that said, we'll see you after Sochi.